close did Seattle come to becoming the next epicenter of fentanyl-driven chaos in the United States? Federal prosecutors and Homeland Security agents revealed that the city nearly drowned under waves of synthetic opioids and cartel-supplied firepower. The recent crackdown, described by investigators as one of the largest in Washington state's history, exposed not only an astonishing quantity of lethal pills and powder, but also an arsenal more reminiscent of a conflict zone than a narcotics operation. The operation, known internally as Hydra, was not just a raid, it was a calculated strike that combined intelligence fusion federal task forces and local enforcement units in a campaign-style offensive. Under President Donald Trump's directive to prioritize cartel disruption as a national security threat, this action has been framed as both a law enforcement triumph and a broader strategic warning to transnational criminal enterprises. According to court filings, agents confiscated grenades, assault rifles, tactical vests, and high-capacity magazines, hardware often seen in Middle Eastern or Eastern European battlefields. Experts from Jane's Defense Weekly noted that such equipment mirrors the paramilitary buildup cartels in Mexico and South America have perfected, making them capable of urban warfare scenarios. For communities in Seattle, this escalation was chilling. These were not just drug traffickers, but heavily armed groups capable of staging battles that could overwhelm underprepared police forces. The seizure of millions of fentanyl-laced pills was equally staggering. Epidemiologists pointed out that the volume recovered was sufficient to deliver a potentially lethal dose to every resident of the state of Washington twice over. The parallels to international conflicts are striking, just as Russia and Ukraine are locked in a brutal contest where logistics corridors decide life and death. Cartel logistics in the Pacific Northwest have turned port cities into strategic nodes. Analysts from the RAND Corporation compared cartel trafficking routes to military supply chains, flexible, redundant, and hardened against interdiction. They rely on hidden compartments in commercial trucks, encrypted communications, and drone reconnaissance. Much like Iran's Revolutionary Guard exports technology to proxies, these cartels equip their operatives with weapons and surveillance tools that blur the line between organized crime and insurgency. What made this case particularly significant was the scale of coordination among agencies. Federal task forces worked in tandem with local police, utilizing advanced surveillance and even AI-driven data analysis to map the cartel's command hierarchy. Officials told Reuters that the arrests included mid-tier commanders and regional financiers who acted as the connective tissue between Mexican cartels and U.S. street-level distributors. Unlike the arrest of small-time dealers, these captures targeted the operational brains of the network, those capable of rerouting supply lines or corrupting enforcement channels. From a strategic lens, this reflects a broader shift. Just as NATO recalibrates its doctrine to deter hybrid threats combining cyber irregular warfare and conventional arms, the United States is confronting a hybrid criminal insurgency at home. Homeland Security insiders quoted by The Guardian emphasized that if cartels can smuggle grenades into American cities, adversaries like China or Iran are watching carefully. The risk is not just public health devastation, but also the erosion of public trust in the government's ability to maintain internal security. The seasoned perspective here, after 20 years analyzing the intersection of security and criminal networks, is clear. Cartels have reached a level of sophistication where they are no longer just criminal syndicates but quasi-paramilitary actors. They adopt tactics from war zones, exploit global instability, and funnel them into American streets. The Hydra operation's success therefore resonates beyond Seattle. It signals to both allies and adversaries that Washington is willing to treat cartels as strategic-level threats. But will such operations be enough to dismantle a Hydra whose heads keep regenerating? Could the escalation of cartel militarization eventually force the United States to adopt counterinsurgency-style campaigns within its own borders? What does it mean when a single seizure of fentanyl tablets can shift the entire balance of the overdose crisis in a U.S. region? In Seattle, federal agents described the confiscation of millions of pills and pounds of powder as a decisive disruption. But the broader reality shows how fragile the balance remains. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, fentanyl overdoses are now the leading cause of death for Americans under 50. In the past 12 months alone, more than 100,000 fatalities nationwide have been linked to synthetic opioids. The pills seized in Washington state were pressed in forms nearly identical to legitimate pharmaceutical drugs, a deliberate tactic meant to deceive users and expand markets among teenagers and suburban populations. Analysts told BBC News that the scale of supply uncovered in this case was sufficient to trigger a significant price shock across the Pacific Northwest. Street prices for counterfeit oxycodone tablets had already begun to dip, an indicator of surplus supply. In simple terms, cartels had flooded the zone. When law enforcement penetrated one of their warehouses, they didn't just recover contraband, they reset the equation of risk and reward for every local distributor. If 1 million pills vanish from circulation, the shockwave reverberates through dozens of neighborhoods. Prices rise, availability shrinks, and gangs scramble to find alternative suppliers. From a veteran's perspective, this is more than economics, it is about survivability in contested terrain. Just as armies in Ukraine measure the effectiveness of artillery in terms of denied territory narcotics, investigators measure seizures in terms of lives spared. Epidemiologists estimate that each kilogram of fentanyl powder equates to 500,000 potential lethal doses. By that metric, the Hydra operation likely prevented tens of thousands of overdoses in the coming year. Yet the dilemma persists, cartels can re-inject supply with astonishing speed. Border seizures suggest that only a fraction, perhaps 10 to 15% of incoming fentanyl shipments are intercepted. The rest disperses invisibly through national highways, parcel services, and even maritime routes. Weapons also played a central role in this case. Alongside the drugs, federal agents found fragmentation grenades and assault rifles. Defense news analysts stressed that such weaponry underscores a broader trend. Transnational criminal groups treat their U.S. outposts as forward operating bases. Instead of simple stash houses, these are fortified strongpoints designed to resist raids, or at least inflict casualties on law enforcement. In Israel's conflict with Iran-backed groups, small caches of weapons in urban zones often act as both deterrent and propaganda symbol. Similarly, cartels seem intent on projecting a capacity for violence disproportionate to their numbers. Seattle's seizure therefore illuminates a paradox. Every haul highlights both the effectiveness of enforcement and the sheer scale of the ongoing crisis. This is why Western experts increasingly argue that drug cartels should be categorized as hybrid security threats. Rand Corporation studies show that fentanyl trafficking networks adapt almost as quickly as insurgent groups facing NATO forces. They alter routes, recruit new facilitators, and use technology to conceal financial flows. This dynamism keeps them one step ahead of static enforcement strategies. Personal commentary from decades observing such evolutions leads to a sobering conclusion. Seizures, while necessary, resemble tactical victories in a longer campaign. They buy time, relieve pressure, and protect communities, but they do not collapse the adversary. Cartels factor seizures into their cost of doing business. The real breakthrough comes when mid-tier logisticians and financial managers are disrupted, forcing the network into chaos. Seattle's case struck precisely at this level, but the test is whether sustained pressure can follow. The numbers remain stark. 1 million counterfeit pills could yield profits surpassing $20 million at street level. Grenades and rifles once used cost cartels nothing compared to the revenue generated by a single successful shipment. The Hydra operation may have interrupted this cycle briefly, but the question remains, can the United States sustain such pressure nationwide when multiple cartels are simultaneously probing weaknesses at the border, in cyberspace, and on the streets? How do cartels maintain their dominance when every law enforcement agency in the United States is actively hunting them? The answer lies in their tactics, techniques, and procedures, what military professionals call TTPs. In Seattle, investigators uncovered not just a stash of pills and weapons, but also a sophisticated logistical apparatus engineered to withstand repeated disruptions. This apparatus mirrors the adaptability of modern armed forces. According to reports cited by DW, the network employed encrypted messaging, compartmentalized distribution cells, and cache courier systems designed to minimize exposure. Every courier knew only a fragment of the operation, ensuring that a single arrest could not unravel the entire chain. Weapons seized tell an equally troubling story. Grenades and high-capacity rifles were not defensive relics but offensive tools, suggesting the cartel anticipated direct clashes with law enforcement. Jane's Defense Weekly experts observed that these arsenals mirror the paramilitary kits of non-state actors in conflict zones from Syria to the Sahel. The presence of body armor, tactical vests, and night vision optics demonstrated a readiness for sustained firefights. This was no longer the profile of a clandestine narcotics ring. It was the architecture of a force prepared for asymmetric combat inside U.S. cities. Drug concealment strategies also highlight cartel ingenuity. Packages were embedded within legitimate cargo, hidden in modified vehicle compartments, and routed through maritime containers. Defense News pointed out that in the past year, drones have become a key enabler, providing surveillance of law enforcement movements, and even ferrying small quantities of narcotics across secure perimeters. The US Border Patrol has already intercepted multiple cartel-flown drones carrying fentanyl across the southern border. This adaptation mirrors battlefield innovation in Ukraine, where inexpensive drones have redefined reconnaissance and strike capabilities. Cartels borrow directly from such warfront playbooks, proving once again that they are learning organizations. From a veteran analyst's standpoint, these methods carry a chilling implication. America's urban centers risk becoming contested battle spaces, where heavily armed criminal nodes challenge state authority. Just as NATO must anticipate hybrid threats in Eastern Europe, federal and local agencies must prepare for cartel elements deploying military-grade tactics in residential neighborhoods. Seattle's operation exposed this vulnerability before it could erupt into a firefight, but the fact remains the adversary was ready. Cartel financing sustains this operational tempo. Experts from The Guardian explained how laundering networks exploit cryptocurrency shell corporations and trade-based schemes to disguise revenues. Each successful shipment funds better weapons, more advanced communications, and deeper corruption channels. It is a cycle of reinforcement that parallels how sanctioned states such as Iran recycle oil revenues into missile and drone programs. For the cartels, fentanyl is the equivalent of oil, highly profitable, easily moved, and globally destabilizing. The tactics also complicate traditional interdiction. Arresting a mid-level trafficker does not dismantle the network. Another operative steps in immediately. This is why intelligence-driven targeting of leadership nodes becomes critical. Military strategists often emphasize decapitation strikes against command structures. Similarly, dismantling cartel command hierarchies through financial seizures, extraditions, and neutralization of enforcers offers the best chance of disruption. Seattle's case suggested some success here, but sustaining that momentum requires relentless intelligence fusion across agencies. Decades of observing insurgent movements provide one sobering insight: adversaries adapt faster than bureaucracies. Cartels can shift supply routes within days, while government approvals for new enforcement technologies can take months. This tempo advantage allows them to regenerate even after high-profile busts. Unless Washington accelerates its response cycle leveraging AI analytics, drone countermeasures, and maritime tracking, the cartels will continue to exploit the time lag. So the question lingers: as cartels escalate their weaponization and tactical sophistication, is the United States prepared to treat them not merely as criminals but as irregular forces operating on its soil? What happens when the architects of cartel power, the mid-level coordinators and financiers, are finally exposed? In Seattle, the Hydra operation did not just seize drugs and weapons, it pierced the organizational layer that makes such enterprises resilient. Prosecutors described a network where local distributors reported to regional coordinators, who in turn maintained encrypted contact with cartel representatives outside US borders. These coordinators arranged transport-handled payments and resolved disputes with affiliated street gangs. By targeting this tier, federal authorities struck at the connective tissue, the people who keep the pipeline flowing regardless of who gets arrested on the street. Western experts compare this strategy to counterinsurgency campaigns. Just as NATO forces in Afghanistan aim to dismantle Taliban shadow governance by removing district-level commanders, US agencies now focus on dismantling cartel governance structures in American cities. Rand Corporation analysts emphasize that cartels function like multinational corporations. They outsource transport subcontract violence to gangs and invest profits through complex laundering schemes. Taking down a warehouse or street dealer does little to the larger system, but indicting a financial manager or logistics chief creates ripples that disrupt multiple layers at once. Court documents revealed that several of those arrested in Seattle handled financial transactions exceeding tens of millions of US dollars annually. According to Al Jazeera, some used car dealerships, construction firms, and cryptocurrency wallets to launder proceeds. This diversification made them appear as legitimate businessmen, while covertly fueling one of the deadliest narcotics epidemics in modern history. Their arrest marks not only a tactical victory, but also a rare opportunity to map the financial lifeblood of cartel activity. Street gangs also played a pivotal role. Local groups acted as the enforcement arm, distributing product and intimidating rivals. The Guardian noted that this creates a vicious cycle. Cartel alliances strengthen gang power, which in turn destabilizes neighborhoods already vulnerable to crime. By cutting off the cartel supply, authorities weaken these gangs' leverage, though the long-term question remains whether another supplier will simply fill the void. From a seasoned analyst's perspective, leadership nodes are the true pressure points. Having observed insurgent networks from the Middle East to Latin America, one lesson is constant: when mid-tier leaders collapse, cohesion falters. Yet cartels are adept at regenerating. Arrests alone may not suffice unless paired with financial isolation, cross-border extraditions, and cooperation with Mexican authorities. Defense News reported that several indicted figures had direct links to cartel commanders in Sinaloa and Jalisco, underscoring the need for binational strategies. The ripple effects stretch far beyond Seattle. NATO observers point out that US vulnerabilities to hybrid criminal threats send signals abroad. Russia, Iran, and China monitor how Washington handles domestic insurgencies, drawing lessons for exploiting weaknesses. If American cities can be destabilized internally, adversaries may perceive openings to push strategically abroad. In that sense, prosecuting cartel leaders is not merely a domestic matter, it is a defense posture message to the world. The arrests in Seattle reveal a stark truth: drug cartels cannot operate at this scale without embedded networks of facilitators, financiers, logisticians, and enablers. Striking these nodes is the equivalent of cutting arteries rather than trimming branches. But the enduring question is whether the United States can sustain such targeted pressure, or whether the Hydra will regrow stronger, smarter, and more ruthless. Can law alone defeat organizations that function like insurgent armies? The Hydra case in Seattle demonstrates why prosecutors and agents increasingly call for new authorities' legal tools designed not only for crime, but for hybrid warfare. In recent years, lawmakers debated whether cartels should be formally designated as foreign terrorist organizations. Such a move, reported by Reuters, would unlock expanded powers, material support prosecutions, harsher sentencing, and broader surveillance authority. Yet critics warn that blurring the line between crime and terrorism risks civil liberties infringements and diplomatic fallout with Mexico. Asset forfeiture remains one of the most potent weapons. In Seattle, prosecutors announced the seizure of millions of US dollars in cash, cryptocurrency, and property. These financial blows strike deeper than gun battles because they dismantle the infrastructure cartels rely on to recycle profits. Jane's Defense Weekly analysts drew comparisons to counterterrorism financing campaigns used against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By freezing bank accounts, intercepting wire transfers, and collapsing shell companies, the United States can suffocate the enemy's operational budget. Still, cartels innovate faster than regulators, shifting to decentralized platforms and informal trade networks. International cooperation also proves decisive. Al Jazeera highlighted ongoing dialogues between US and Mexican authorities over joint task forces, yet cooperation remains fragile. Corruption within Mexican enforcement and political sensitivities often limit the depth of intelligence sharing. Western experts stress that without durable binational frameworks, operations like Hydra risk becoming isolated victories rather than systemic breakthroughs. This mirrors NATO's challenge in countering hybrid threats. Coordination among allies determines whether tactical wins evolve into strategic success. From the seasoned perspective of 2 decades in the field, one conclusion stands out. Lawfare is both a shield and a sword. It empowers states to pursue cartels with the weight of national security authority, but it also tests the resilience of democratic institutions. Overextension of surveillance, militarization of policing, and erosion of due process risk alienating the very communities that must cooperate to sustain enforcement. The balance is delicate: prosecute cartels like terrorists without treating citizens like suspects. The strategic calculus is equally significant. By framing cartels as national security threats, the United States signals strength to adversaries abroad. Iran and China, already probing American vulnerabilities, interpret such legal innovations as part of Washington's broader defense posture. A failure to apply them consistently could embolden rivals. Conversely, successful lawfare campaigns reassure NATO allies that the United States retains both the capability and the will to confront hybrid threats wherever they emerge. Seattle's operation underscored how deeply law and strategy intertwine. Arrests and seizures grab headlines, but indictments, asset freezes, and extraditions shape the battlefield over the long term. The Guardian quoted senior prosecutors saying that treating cartels as insurgent-like organizations bridges the gap between justice and national defense. Yet the question persists: can Washington's legal arsenal keep pace with adversaries whose tactics evolve daily? What comes next after the Hydra strike in Seattle? Will cartels adapt faster than the state can respond? History suggests they will. Within weeks of major busts, new smuggling corridors open, replacement leaders rise, and supply chains reroute. This regenerative capacity is why many analysts liken cartels to hydras. Cut off one head and two more emerge. According to BBC News, US border officials have already intercepted fresh fentanyl shipments in Arizona and California, suggesting traffickers immediately compensated for the Seattle loss. The question is not whether cartels will adapt, but how swiftly and with what innovations. Likely adaptations include increased reliance on maritime routes where monitoring is less dense and expanded use of drones for both reconnaissance and delivery. Defense News reported that cartels are experimenting with drone swarms to confuse radar and overwhelm interdiction teams. These tactics mirror developments on the Ukraine battlefield, where cheap expendable drones have altered the balance of power against heavily armed opponents. By adopting similar methods, cartels transform American skies into contested spaces, forcing law enforcement to consider counter-drone defenses once reserved for military bases. Financial strategies will also evolve. Analysts told The Guardian that cryptocurrency used among cartels surged nearly 40% in the past year, with decentralized exchanges masking illicit transfers. To counter this, US agencies are investing in AI-driven blockchain forensics, yet lag times remain. Cartels exploit those gaps with precision, proving once again that they operate at the cutting edge of illicit innovation. From a strategic standpoint, the implications extend well beyond narcotics. As NATO monitors hybrid threats worldwide, US struggles against cartels demonstrate the vulnerabilities of even the most advanced societies to irregular adversaries. Russia, Iran, and China are likely studying these developments, probing how criminal chaos can distract Washington from global commitments. A Homeland Security official quoted by Reuters framed it bluntly: "Every hour spent fighting cartels at home is an hour adversaries abroad can exploit." This diversion of resources represents a subtle but profound strategic cost. Community resilience therefore becomes critical. Experts argue that enforcement must be paired with prevention, education, treatment, and neighborhood engagement. RAND studies confirm that supply interdiction alone cannot reduce demand. Without demand, reduction cartels retain their market no matter how many pills are seized. President Donald Trump has repeatedly emphasized this dual-front strategy, linking border security with domestic investment in treatment centers. Whether this balance can be achieved remains uncertain. From the seasoned analyst's perspective, Seattle's Hydra operation shines as a model of what coordinated enforcement can achieve, yet it also warns of the scale of the challenge ahead. Cartels now operate as transnational insurgencies, blending organized crime with paramilitary tactics and global financing networks. They are not merely law enforcement problems, they are strategic threats whose actions reverberate across NATO-US credibility and the global fight against hybrid adversaries. The enduring question remains, will the United States escalate its approach, treating cartels as the insurgent forces they have become, or will Hydra be remembered as another temporary victory in a war with no end? And more importantly, are Americans prepared for the possibility that the next battlefield in this struggle may not be abroad, but in their own neighborhoods? Seattle's Operation Hydra exposed the transformation of cartels into quasi-paramilitary networks capable of destabilizing US cities. Agents seized grenades, rifles, and millions of fentanyl pills, enough to threaten an entire state. Analysis shows these groups mirror insurgent forces abroad: encrypted communications, drone surveillance, diversified laundering, and fortified safe houses. Arrests struck at mid-level coordinators and financiers, disrupting the connective tissue of supply chains. Yet cartels adapt swiftly, regenerating routes through borders, maritime corridors, and cyberspace. The seizures saved lives in the short term, but they also revealed the scale of the challenge. Treating cartels as national security threats invites new legal authorities and international cooperation, but it also risks overreach. The struggle resonates beyond narcotics. NATO allies and US adversaries alike interpret cartel battles as indicators of America's resilience. As Russia, Iran, and China escalate hybrid strategies abroad, criminal insurgencies at home distract Washington's attention. The Hydra case stands as both victory and warning. Enforcement can deliver tactical wins, but strategic success demands sustained pressure, financial disruption, and community resilience. Whether the United States escalates or endures perpetual regeneration remains the defining question for America's internal security.